Church, hello, hello, hello. Hey, thanks for turning that back. I appreciate that. Again, you toss it out. You don't know if it's coming back. That's behind the, kind of behind the curtain of a preacher. You go out there, you smile, you say hello, you're just wondering. And then you say it. So thank you. That was really nice of you. Hey, welcome to week number 2 in our summer series. We're calling it Taglines. We're looking at cultural phrases, maybe song titles, movie lines, movie titles, things that have been in the cultural zeitgeist for our entire lives that can actually trace their roots all the way back to the Bible. They can be found in ancient literatures that we have been given in this library of books inspired by God called the Bible, and a lot of these things are actually things that Jesus said. Things that you and I might interact with on a regular basis, phrases, that sort of thing, that started with Jesus. And we're going to continue that conversation this week and for the better part of the summer. Every year, the global fitness brand and strength and conditioning program known as CrossFit hosts what they call the annual CrossFit Games. Now, it started as a strength and conditioning program, and it popped up in these gyms called CrossFit gyms all over America, and that spawned this growth that no one saw coming, and it eventually became this global program and this global community and this global fitness company. And so every year they host the 40 men and women who qualify as competitors to participate in what they call the CrossFit Games. And their objective is to find the most fit man and woman on earth. And so competitors come from all over the world to do this. And for about a week, all of them compete in these events, and they all do the same thing. And at the end of it, whoever has the most points, they are crowned the fittest man on earth, the fittest woman on earth. And a few years back, one of the events, if you think of it like decathlon for the Olympics, they'll have different events on different days. And a few years ago, one of the events was a 5K trail run. That's 3.1 miles through a trail. And I have a picture for you. You can take a look. Right here, you will find these are two of the male athletes in the CrossFit Games a few years ago. You can see this guy here, number 31. He's wearing what looks like cargo pants. The guy behind him has gloves. I don't know if any of you have ever gone running before, but most of the time you don't wear gloves to go on a run. But all of these athletes were prepped in the briefing before they went on this 5K trail run, and they were told, okay, here's what's going on the trail. We've seen coyotes on the trail. We've seen snakes on the trail. Deer, wild boar are on the trail. There's sharp rocks, there's drop-offs, there's trees. You can even see from this picture, he's dodging a tree to his left, a big rock on his right, and there's all this dust that's being kicked up. You can see the fear in his face. Look at his face. He's coming down just thinking, please don't fall down this mountain, right? For 3.1 miles, a 5K, these men and women raced to see who could compete this trail run the fastest. And what happened this year in this trail run, you can take it off now, we don't need to stare at them anymore. What happened this year is the winner for the trail run comes to the bottom and he's crossing the finish line. And at the finish line, there stands the director of the CrossFit Games, a former Navy SEAL standing there like this. And the winner comes across the finish line, and as soon as he crosses the finish line, you can see the elation on his face. He's won this event. He's so excited. He's relieved. Nothing killed me on that trail. I didn't fall down the hill. He's so happy. There's just this sense of, yes, I did it. And as he crosses the finish line, the director of the CrossFit Games looks at him and goes, okay, great. Now you need to turn around and go back the way you came, and you'll cross the finish line on the other side this time. Yeah. He did what you did. He laughed. He said, oh, okay, sure. And sure enough, the director of the CrossFit Games says, I'm not joking. And with that, his face fell. He had just put out an all-in effort to cross the finish line, and he has to turn around and, okay. And he goes back. Can you imagine being second place on that one? And you're coming back, and you see him cross the finish line, and you're like, great, second place. And then you see him turn around after seemingly arguing with a guy. He turns around, and he starts running by you, and you're running by, and you're like, hey, man, what are you doing? And he goes, we got to do the whole thing over again. And he's like, okay, he's just punking me. Nope. And then you find out he was serious. And then imagine third, fourth, fifth, and there you start to see a theme, and they're like, why are all these people going back the way we just, and then you start to be like 20th place, you're nervous, because you're like, what is happening? And you can hear people saying, we got to turn back and go the other way, and you're like, Every one of them were about to go an extra 3.1 miles up that trail. Now, today, why do I share that story with you? Because this week, we are going to look at a phrase that you have all heard, maybe you've said, maybe you've lived by, and it is this: go the extra mile. If you can't tell, I even dressed for it today. We're going to look at where this phrase came from, because we all are familiar with it. What does it mean? Work harder. Do the things others won't do so you can get the things others won't get. Put in the extra work. Shoot the extra free throws in practice. Run those hills after practice so you can get faster. Put in a little extra weight. Do more so that your boss rewards you. It's permeated all of culture. HR consultants. There are job coaching companies that sit down with employees and teach them ways to go the extra mile. Coaches use it all the time. It's made its way into the American military outfits with special forces units. What do they say? You want to be different? Be different. Go a little extra. We even hear phrases like the difference between extraordinary and ordinary is that little extra. Go the extra mile. But do you know where it came from? See, a lot of us, we've interacted with this phrase, we've said it, and it's been a positive thing in our lives. It has been something that has maybe even blessed our lives. Maybe we've had positive or negative interactions with it, but we're all familiar with going the extra mile. But did you know that Jesus was the first person to ever say it? Jesus is the one who introduced the concept of going the extra mile. And he did it inside of a context that you may not have seen coming. And it's against a backdrop that is going to sound extremely radical. When I say go the extra mile, no one flinches at it because we're so familiar with the phrase. But when it was first introduced into the ears of people, it was a radical thing to say. And he says it right in the middle of what most people believe is the greatest message ever preached. If you have your phone, your Bible, you can follow along on screen. We are going to find this line in the first book of your New Testament. It is the book of Matthew in chapter 5. And in verse 41 of chapter 5 in Matthew, we're going to find one little line that amidst the backdrop of the greatest message ever preached, and in a cultural situation that we're going to unpack and learn together, Jesus introduces this idea, this practice of going the extra mile. And he says this: if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them, what? 2 miles. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Now, in order for us to understand how radical that is, in order for us to understand just how powerful of a phrase that would be, we need to understand what's going on and who the audience is and why it would jar them in the way it would jar them. Because it doesn't jar us to hear that. But this group of people listening to it initially, this was out there. See, the Jewish population at this point in time in history, that part of the Middle East was under Roman occupation. The Romans ruled that people in that place. And the Roman system, the Roman culture, kind of the Roman posture towards life really, was all about conquering. The Romans were known as this mighty military movement, this kingdom that would just conquer people and places left and right. And so here you have Jesus knowing the people who are listening to him are Jewish people under Roman occupation, maybe even some Roman citizens who are a part of things because Jesus is teaching and people are following and they're listening. And Jesus, knowing that they all live against the backdrop that their culture that they are subject to says, get, power, conquer, conquer. And Jesus tells all of them, if anybody forces you to go 1 mile, go 2 miles. He introduces this idea of service into a culture that primarily valued self. And here's what's brilliant about what Jesus does here, and he does it on purpose. Jesus knows what's going on in culture. He knew the temperature of behavioral climate and the dynamic between the Jewish people and the Roman government. And so Jesus uses the word, if anyone, what? What does he say? If anyone forces you to go 1 mile. Here's what's interesting. Matthew, who records this, puts that word in there on purpose. Do you know what that word means? That word in the Greek means to impress upon. To impress upon. If anyone impresses upon you to go 1 mile, go with them too. Here's what Jesus knew, and what makes his use of this word brilliant, and what makes the teaching of this so spectacularly profound for everyone listening. At that point in history, the Romans had a law, and it was known as the Roman impressment law. Forces impressment, to impress upon. Jesus, knowing this, knowing that these people lived underneath the rule of Roman impressment law, says if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go 2. Because under the Roman impressment law, any Roman soldier could commandeer the time or resources of any citizen for anything they needed. And I'll give you an example. A Roman soldier could come upon you, any citizen, and demand use of your mule, your oxen, your camel. They could take a cart, they could take a wagon, and you could not refuse them of this request. You would have to give it up to them for however long they needed it to be used for whatever purpose they wanted it for. What's more, it got personal, this Roman law of impressment, because what would happen is this law, underneath it, kind of, Law A, Article Section 27 of this law, one of the things that was included was any Roman soldier could demand a civilian at any time to stop what they were doing and carry that soldier's equipment for 1,000 paces. In the Greek, it is 1 million, which is where we get 1 mile, around 1,600 meters. Under Roman impressment law, any Roman soldier could approach a citizen and demand, whatever you're doing, stop doing it, pick up my gear, and walk it for 1 mile to where I need to go. This gear would have been up to 100 pounds. So at any point in time, you could be living your life and a Roman soldier could happen upon you, and whether they needed to, because it gets hot, They get tired, they need a break, whether it was to actually serve them or help them, or whether they would just abuse this law because they would want to remind people of the authority they had over them. You would know as a civilian at any given time that Roman soldier walks by and the next half hour of your life could be spoken for, and you're going to have to drop what you're doing, pick up 100 pounds of gear, and walk over whatever terrain was in front of you for the next mile and carry this soldier's stuff. Not only is that a physical reality that is tough, but imagine the psychological realities that you had to deal with. The dynamic there, knowing that at any given time, your entire day could be interrupted. What if it was a mile up a hill and you knew you're going to spend the next hour of your life? What if you were on your way to visit a friend or a family member? What if you were in the middle of doing something to get ready for a meal and you had to just stop and abandon it? And so you lived with the tension. You and I know what it feels like to have something looming over us and there's just a tension. We get up and we know we've got this thing we have to do today. I have to go to the dentist today. And so you feel the tension of that. Now what's more, not only was there a physical and psychological tension that they had to manage with this Roman impressment law, specifically on carrying a soldier's equipment, but this cut deep to the heart of the Jewish population. See, a little history lesson for us. The Jewish people, the chosen people of God, the people of Israel, they experienced what you and I would call generational oppression. I'll take it back to early in the Old Testament of your Bible. Even a man like Moses, you would recognize him. He's on the Mount Rushmore of Judeo-Christian history. Moses, 10 Commandments, you've heard of it. Back then, the Jewish people were taken as slaves by the Egyptians. And they lived in that culture and they worked for the Egyptians. After that, they would be conquered, invaded, and then exiled to places by groups of people named Assyrians, Babylonians, eventually the Greeks. And now here we have the Romans have now conquered this people. The Jewish people understood something that was so heavy on their hearts. It was such a reality for their people because for generations and generations, they had experienced this oppression. So the generational impact of that just mentally and emotionally would have been a weight that they had to deal with. And you and I, we get generational stuff. You may not even realize you get generational stuff. There are generational realities for you that impact your life. I'll give you some examples of us that you'll understand because you have these. My wife, her great-grandparents immigrated from Italy. They came over on a boat and they settled in the Garden State of New Jersey. So they settled there. They set up shop, literally a shop. They ran an appliance shop and they lived in an apartment over top of this appliance shop in South Jersey. So now my wife's family on her mother's side, the Lanzalotti family, lives in New Jersey. So when we talk to them and they talk about water, they don't say water, because if you're from New Jersey, you say wooder. Yep, it's as weird as it sounds because it does sound like wooder. My brother lives in New Jersey. He does the same thing to me. But as a result of my wife's family being Italian immigrants to the East Coast, that has had generational impact on us. We eat certain things around the holidays that as a boy growing up in the South, we didn't eat. There's a generational reality there because of her Italian descent. Even in my family, the Smith family, all of the men in the Smith family are war veterans. They couldn't just, be satisfied with regular military service, which is awesome enough. They decided, no, Scott, we're going to go ahead and all become decorated war veterans. My uncle, a veteran of Desert Storm in the United States Air Force. My other uncle, Army Sergeant, veteran of the Korean War. My own father, U.S. Army Sergeant, veteran of the Vietnam War. And my grandfather, who I am named after and my son is named after, was a frogman in the United States Navy. You can Google that later. A Purple Heart recipient, veteran of the Korean War. And then I became a pastor. I rebelled and became a pastor. But that had generational impact on me. So every year when we would celebrate the service men and women of our country, it resonated differently with me because I grew up with it and seeing it. I would see the old uniforms, I would hear the stories, I would see the medals, I would see all of the things that would be decorated in homes. And that generational reality had an impact on me. See, the Jewish people lived with generational oppression. And so here they are, 2,000 years ago, expecting a military national leader, a Messiah, to come and rescue them from all of this generational oppression. And here's Jesus, and they're thinking, this is him. And he gives this message, and in the message, he's not telling them, and here's ways to break the generational curse of oppression. You know what he says to them? He says, when you experience that oppression, when someone impresses upon you to go 1 mile, go ahead and lace up them shoes and go a second one. That was radical for these people to hear. They didn't want to hear it. They didn't expect to hear it. It was paradigm shifting, absolutely radical. But he said it. Why? Because going the extra mile is not about what you and I think it is. Going the extra mile is not about getting more. It's not about achieving more. You know what going the extra mile is about? Service. See, it doesn't sound as radical to us because we don't live with that backdrop, but also when Jesus went on to teach why, it started to make sense. When you consider the radical lengths that God would go to rescue mankind from the sin and selfishness that separates us from God, that God would send his only son, Jesus, to give his life so that we could know him. If God would take such a radical approach to the rescue, if Jesus would be the radical rescue, now understanding that as Jesus is prepping them for this, it doesn't sound as radical for Jesus to say, if someone forces you to go 1 mile, go 2. Why? Because service is modeled after Jesus. Because Jesus, the one who introduced this idea of going the extra mile, he lived it. Because he came, what does it say? Not to be served, but to serve and to give his life for many. So the one who introduced this phrase that we all know is the one who has gone the extra more than anyone has ever gone the extra. So here is Jesus teaching this radical thing. And when we understand that, we see it differently. Because what's happened is we've kind of made going the extra mile a little bit about ourselves if we're not careful. And I want to be clear so that there's not any confusion. Our interpretation, our extended interpretation of going the extra mile, that's a result of what Jesus teaches. It's not a bad thing. Working hard, doing more than what's expected, those are all good things. In fact, they are godly things. The early father of church planting, if you want to call him that, was a man named Paul. He wrote to a church in the New Testament of your Bible, in the book of Colossians chapter 3, verse 17, Paul actually says this. He says, do all unto what? The glory of God. See, everything we should do should have a purpose. We should go the extra mile. But we tend to make going the extra mile about our achievements, don't we? But what does even Paul say? He says, do all unto the what? The glory of God. That's a result of going the extra mile. But the reason Jesus taught to go the extra mile was because Jesus knew something special happened on mile 2. See, God doesn't measure success the way we measure success. The way we define success is not the way God defines success. We define success central to our accomplishments. But God defines success as faithful service to Him. Because Jesus taught this and He modeled this. That Jesus made the way, taught the way, He showed the way. So this idea of going the extra mile is not about us. It is about service, specifically service that points people to the character of God in our lives. That is why it cut straight to the heart. It cut through the dynamic of generational oppression. It cut through the dynamic of psychological tension. It cut through the dynamic of physical difficulty. And it cut right to the heart of the issue that going the extra mile was all about service. Because Jesus knew something very special happened on that second mile. You know what happened on that second mile? That second mile told that Roman soldier, I'm going with you, I'm serving you, not because I have to, but because I choose to. Out of humility, out of honor, out of love, and out of kindness. See, that second mile is all about service and sacrifice and submission. And service speaks loudly. Even when it's quiet service and no one can see but God, your service tells God you want to honor Him with what you are doing. And when that service is seen by others, you know what service tells people? Service tells people they matter. Not just to us, but they matter to God. Something very special happens on that second mile. Because on that second mile, we see service. See, that is what going the extra mile is all about. And when you dial it back a little bit, it's all about attitude, isn't it? Think about it. We serve with what? The right heart attitude. We've heard it before, we've said it before. Because what we do is usually a reflection of our attitudes. Our actions are influenced by our attitudes, aren't they? The way you think about something usually determines how you approach it. But let's trace that back a little bit. If our actions are a reflection of our attitude, that I am not going to attempt to spell without Google, then what impacts our attitude? It's this. Our values. See, the Roman occupation valued conquering. They valued greed. They valued power. What does Jesus teach to value here? You know what He teaches to value here? 2 things, and they're the only things that matter. I've checked. I've looked it up. Everyone will spend eternity somewhere. Mortality rate still at 100%. So there is nothing you're taking with you in this life except what? People. So what matters to God? God and people. When Jesus teaches go the extra mile, He is teaching adopt the values of God. Because what matters to God? God and people. And when you value what God values, you see people and situations the way God sees people and situations. So your life is a response to that. See, going the extra mile is all about service. Do you value what God values? Because if you do, it'll show up. So how does it show up? How do we take this one line in the greatest message ever preached and, pun intended, lace up our shoes with it and go the extra mile? How do we do that? Well, I'll tell you a few ways we can go the extra mile. If you're married, one of the ways you go the extra mile in your marriage is to serve your spouse. Now that sounds so obvious, but consider some of the private internal conversations we've had with ourselves. If we've had them out loud, then we've stepped in it and we'll understand this. But how many of us, even in the context of marriage, have had conversations like this? I've worked all day. It's their job to do the laundry. No, it's their job to take the trash out. No, it's their job to do the dishes. I've been at home with these kids all day, and he wants to cuddle on the couch. How about you take these kids and go clean up the dog poop in the yard? Somebody clapped. How many of us have those conversations? We do it, don't we? I've been guilty of it. We've done it. We've seen those dishes. We've seen those dirty dishes. We've looked at those dirty dishes for 5 straight days. And what do? We look at those dishes and we talk to the dishes. We say, I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. And what do we say? What do we say? To our spouse, I will wait you out. I will not break. You want to go the extra mile in your marriage? Serve your spouse. And here's a real pro tip for healthy marriage. If you serve your spouse in a way that he or she needs, and you know he or she needs it, but you serve them before they ask you to serve them, you will build closeness and intimacy within your marriage. There's a pro tip. If you want that, the ways of getting that are different than you may think. Sometimes you will build closeness in your marriage by taking out the trash and cleaning up those dishes. It's very practical as we get practical. Think about as parents. We do it too, because as parents, this is hard. Grandparents, this is hard. Well, grandparents, it may be a little bit easier because you tend to spoil them and then just hand them back to us, hopped up on sugar. Thank you for that. Or as aunts and uncles, I like to be the fun uncle, so I just eliminate the word no from my vocabulary when I'm hanging out with my nieces and nephews, and my sister and brother-in-law love that. But with parents, it's difficult, right? Why? Because our kids frustrate us. They do. Oh, your disobedience is really trying my patience. Maybe our kids get a little older and culture influences them, so they start to play around with opinions that make us nervous because those opinions don't reflect God's character, they reflect worldly values. And so we operate out of fear instead of having a conversation. One of the things we can do to go the extra mile as parents is instead of making accusational statements at our kids when they do something wrong or they have an opinion that we disagree with, instead of making accusational statements, why don't you try this? Try asking questions. Because as parents, we're not raising kids. We're raising adults. They're not going to stay kids. And accusational statements might teach them how to act. But if you want to teach them how to think, you'll ask questions that will get them thinking. Can I tell you something that I've personally struggled with? This one's going to come from the crock pot of Scott Smith's own life. Sometimes we don't forgive our kids because they did something and it has frustrated us so much, and we don't want to forgive them. We think they owe us a rerouted behavior before we will love them the way we are supposed to. You want to go the extra mile with your kids? Serve them after they mess up. I'm not saying to excuse poor choices or excuse bad behavior. We should teach through that. But if you serve your kids after they've messed up and they know they've messed up and they see you serving, do you know what you're teaching your kids? You're teaching your kids that you love them more than what they did. You are showing your kids the love of Jesus. That is one way to go the extra mile with your kids. One of the ways that's hard to go the extra mile is just with people in general. So you may not be married, you may not be a parent or grandparent or aunt or uncle, but you interact with people, and that's hard. You know why? Because people are difficult. In first service, I said that, and about 14 people said, amen. And I thought, wow, all right. The other people are the difficult people. Yeah, they appreciated that. They really did. It's hard to go the extra mile with people. Why? Because people frustrate us. They say things that really bug us. They do things that really bug us. They do things at work that really bug us. Some people get things we wish we had. And so it's hard to go the extra mile with them. Can I encourage you some ways to go the extra mile with people? Is just be kind and be patient. Such an elementary level lesson that I feel like could be taught in a Sunday school, but my goodness, can I be convicted by it? See, a lot of people say a lot of things, specifically on the internet. You know, one of the great ways you can go the extra mile with people is to just let some things go. One of the best responses to people saying things that frustrate us is no response. To just be patient. Maybe going the extra mile for some of us is forgiving someone who wronged us. But I'll tell you, sometimes you got to forgive people in the absence of their request for your forgiveness. Because you might be holding out for that person to come ask for your forgiveness. They wronged me. They owe me this request. And you're never getting that request. Can you forgive them without them asking? Because that second mile is exhausting, but what's more exhausting is holding on to the weight of bitterness because you don't want to forgive someone. And actually, the best thing you can do is to lace up your shoes, pick up that 100 pounds of weight, and go the extra mile and cancel the debt that you've given them and forgive them for the wrong you've done. See, going the extra mile is not about what we think it is. It's about service. But let's be honest, it's not easy. Going the extra mile is hard. So in order for us to have the endurance, to have the stamina, to have the grit, to have the posture, to have the what? To have the attitude to go the extra mile, we got to remember why Jesus said go the extra mile in the first place. We got to remember what God values. Going the extra mile is all about attitude, because going the extra mile is living in view of what God has done for you. It's a response to God's love, to God's mercy, to God's grace, to God's generosity, to his compassion, to send Jesus to make a way and fix the brokenness that you could not fix on your own. That is what going the extra mile is all about. It says, God, thank you for all you've done for me. So help my life be a reflection of your love. Going the extra mile is all about attitude and service, so that people would see the love of Jesus and the character of God in your life. That second mile speaks loudly, because that second mile is where service is seen. So, this week, if you'll allow me one more pun, will you lace up your shoes and go the extra mile? In what places and spaces and with what people will you go the extra mile this week? Because if you value what God values, you'll live a second mile life. And that life not only points others to Jesus, it brings you closer to him as well. Because that second mile was introduced by the one our faith relies on. Let's pray, and we'll continue to sing together. God, thank you again for your word. Jesus, for your truth, for just slotting in this one line in this massive message, but in that one line, giving us words that can transform our relationships. It can transform our posture in life. That even as we see people as mattering most to you, God, as doing all to your glory, that even in those areas where we work hard and we go the extra mile, we're doing that as a reflection of your goodness, of your generosity in our lives. So God, I pray that you give us the endurance, that you remind us and that you put in us the values that you value so we can have an attitude that reflects gratitude, so we can make choices that take us on mile number 2, so that people would see your love through our lives. God, thank you for that. Be honored as we give this time back to you in worship. It is in your name we pray. Amen.